This is Willie Self here tying tonight, and I'm going to be tying my Crazy Rabbit, which is a streamer. It's a real simplistic little streamer that we tie up a lot of people that are using. We tie it on a 700 number 4 Dairiki, which is a nice heavy wire hook. We're going to be using a 1/4 inch bead, which we're going to place on that hook first of all. I'm going to place it in the vise. Make sure that it's good and tight in there. And we're going to start our thread about 2/3 of the way back on the shank. And we're going to start wrapping the thread down and getting a good thread base to the fly itself. You want to bring your thread back to the barb of the hook. Throw in a good 1/2 hitch there. And the next item that the first part of it's going to actually be the tail. We're going to tie in some flash, some crinkle flash, which is made by Cascade Crest Tools. My friend Pat Dunlap over there. And the tail, we're going to be about 1/2 the length of the shank. And I usually wet that material before, because we're going to use it again in the fly. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take some 25 thousandths or 30 thousandths lead, and we're going to come up about 1/8 right at the point of the hook, and we're going to wind that right onto the shank. We're going to come up to that 2/3 mark that we left with our thread. Go ahead and break the lead off, and we'll tie the lead into place. I like to secure that lead nice and tight because I don't want it to slip or move once it's on the shank. And we're going to go ahead and bring our thread back to where the tail started. And we're just going to check it and kind of check our space. We're going to move that 1/4 inch bead back over the top of it, you know, to make sure it slides around a little bit, which is no problem. Then we're going to take a strip of rabbit, and it doesn't really matter what color it is. I usually like to use a standard strip, not a Texas strip or any of those. And I usually clip it off square like so, and then I angle cut that to just give it a little bit of a taper. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and measure that to where that hair is actually coming back to the back end of the flash. And I'll simply separate that hair like so. And I'll lay that right down on the shank of the hook. I don't like to make the tails very long because I don't like short strikes on these flies. When you get these larger trout hitting these things, I like them to make sure they get some steel in their face and not just fur. You wrap that down really good. You know, you're going to put at least a good 10 wraps on that right back there and really keep it into place right there, and you can see where it stays into place. Then you're just going to lay that back out of the way and advance your thread to the front of it. And then we're going to tie in some braided tinsel. And you're starting to taper the body a little bit there with the way right behind the lead. Go ahead and advance your thread forward and simply wrap the tinsel. I don't believe in tying complicated flies. I like functional flies that look good. Not necessarily to me, but to the fish. And that's all you're going to do is bring that up right there where the lead ends, because you've already measured that from when you started your thread. And you're going to tie that down nice and tight. And I did not grab my tool. And I usually just go ahead and throw a whip finish in here. Not that it's really needed because it's going to be buried. And imagine you could throw your thread over the bead, but I like to make sure that it's tied down good, and I just restart my thread. Okay, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie in some polar chenille, which is really nice and flashy. You know, it comes in a lot of different variations and colors. You set it right on top of the shank of the hook, tie it in securely. Lay that back over the top. Throw a half hitch in. Go ahead and just start winding this polar chenille. And you're going to make about 3 wraps with this towards the eye, and you're just going to kind of pull it back like so. Bring it up, tie it off. And I just kind of pull it back. You can see how I'm just stroking it out with my fingers. Just bringing it back like so. And I go ahead and I wrap that down right back to the bead. What that does is it locks that bead right against the lead. And tie that down, make yourself a nice little base. The next thing is we're going to take this crystal flash again, where we have it, because this adds just a little bit, and we're going to make it about the length of the fly. And we're simply going to tie it in on one side to length, wrap that down, bring your flash right straight across, tie it on the other side, measure it out to the length of the fly again, and snip. Now I just force this down with my fingers like so. Just kind of pull this nice flash down here. There's no sense in burying it. And bring the rabbit forward. Go ahead and spread it. Go ahead and start tying it down. You need to have this very secure, because we're going to go ahead and wrap this forward here in just a second. And there's no sense in switching up using different kinds of rabbit or like crosscut. Just a standard piece of rabbit will work real well. Go ahead and wrap this down, and you've built a little bit of a tapered head or underbody, and bring your thread up and cover up the shank to the eye. Throw in a half hitch. Then you're going to take this rabbit and hold it up like so and bring it forward and then around, and then you wrap this along the shank, and you're pulling it very tight like so. And what I like to do is just kind of brush that and just keep wrapping it forward. And there's 3 or 4 good wraps on this, because I always like to leave enough room for a head. It's kind of like my little trademark. I like to have a nice clean head on this. And what I like to do is this, it's hard to see how this is, but you got to trust the thread. Come in like so, right over the top, pull it snug, and just keep wrapping. I want at least 3 to 4 good wraps on this. You'll notice how my little finger is stabilizing that hook. That's really important, because you don't want this thing bouncing around. And then just come in and cut that off. Now we're going to go ahead and tie that down really, really well. And I like to have a pretty decent little head on there, just a little tapered head. I use quite a bit of thread. I usually don't buy it by the spool. Now, when I'm tying the whip finish, I like to just kind of wet down that fly just a little bit. The reason that I put that flash in behind that and the bead is because I like the flash to hold the rabbit out away from the body, so it gives a great profile. And that bead, the way it's placed inside the body, as we can see it underneath here, it allows this fly to sink at a flat rate. You know, in other words, it sinks flat, but it sinks very, very well. The way that I like to fish this fly is either out of a boat, and I usually just rod tip and then strip a little bit, but I don't do a lot of stripping with it, because it works just fine all by itself. in the water, and it's very, very active. And you have the finished fly, the crazy rabbit. Just to give you an example of this, I'm just going to simply blow on this. It lays down like that, but as soon as you stop it, the fly itself, all of this rabbit comes forward like this, and it just explodes out like that. And that's the end of the fly.